Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Last week we began our study of Genesis 4, the Cain and Abel story. So if you haven't watched that yet, you'll want to pause this and go back and watch that first because it leads into this one. This week we're considering the consequences of Cain's sin. As with Adam and Eve, Yahweh approaches Cain with a question after his rebellion. He doesn't ask in this story, "Where are you?" but he asks, "Where is your brother Abel?" Consistently in the story of Cain and Abel, Abel is referred to as your brother, his brother, continually emphasizing the kinship that they're supposed to share and the partnership that they're supposed to experience. And it's interesting to notice that Abel never speaks in this story. He is silent. But in this passage, we learn that his silence does not mean that God does not notice him. So the Lord asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" And he says, "I don't know," which is an interesting play into this question of the knowledge of good and evil. What does it mean to know good and evil? Here, Cain claims not to know about his brother's death, even though he's personally responsible for it. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's guardian? Is it my job to look out for him? In fact, it is. It's always our job to look out for each other. The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." So Abel's voice is silent, but his blood cries out to Yahweh from the soil, the very soil from which Cain's half-hearted offering had come. As his parents did, Cain is now going to experience alienation. Yahweh tells Cain, "Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Matthew Lynch points out in his book on violence, portrayal of violence in the Hebrew Bible, that sin has ecological consequences because our human vocation is stewardship. So we've been looking at the image of God passages at Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and we've seen that central to our human vocation is our responsibility to care for the earth. And here, when Cain fails to guard the life of his brother, the very earth receives that violence and is affected by it. So as his parents did, Cain will experience alienation from God, alienation from his brother who he's killed, and from the land itself. And the weight of this is heavy for him. He won't belong anywhere. He will be constantly unsettled. Cain realizes too late what he has lost. In Miroslav Volf's book, Exclusion and Embrace, he says this about the Cain and Abel story. Cain was confronted with God's measure of what truly matters and what is truly great. Since he could not change the measure and refused to change himself, he excluded both God and Abel from his life. Anger was the first link in a chain of exclusions. Instead of looking up toward God, his countenance fell in a breach of communion with God. Instead of listening to God, he turned a deaf ear to God's warning. By proposing to go out into the field, he banished the community from exercising judgment over his act. Finally, he performed the ultimate act of exclusion by rising up against his brother Abel and murdering him. So Cain realizes that he's unleashed a cycle of violence. Without the protection of community, someone may kill him. Now, this is an interesting moment. Maybe you've wondered about it. Who is Cain actually afraid is going to kill him? Aren't Adam and Eve and Cain the only humans on the earth? Well, this story seems to suggest to me that there are other humans. Cain is about to get married, we'll see in a few verses. So our two options are Cain marries a sister that we aren't told about, or there are other humans available for Cain to marry. It also tells us that he builds a city, which you don't need if you only have one family. So this story seems to suggest to us that there are other humans that God created, and that Cain fears these humans because in that time period, any strangers would have been feared and eliminated. And so for Cain not to be part of a community, for him to be just wandering around, puts him at great risk. God graciously protects Cain, not because he's dismissing Cain's sin, he will already be bearing a huge weight, but in order to end the cycle of violence that pollutes the ground. God puts a mark on Cain. We don't know what kind of mark this is, but it's something that would have communicated to people, whoa, this guy is under the protection of the gods, so we better not touch him. God's mark does not end Cain's judgment, but it sets God as the only legitimate judge of Cain. And so Cain moves east of Eden, and we have already the second exile in the book of Genesis. First, Adam and Eve are sent east of the garden, and now Cain is sent even further east to live life on his own. It's a sobering reminder of the power of human sin to disrupt and fracture relationships with each other, with God, and with the ground from which we were taken. It's a reminder to each of us that we need to prioritize and live under God's definition of good and evil rather than defining things for ourselves. And it's a reminder that when God confronts us with our sin, we need to take the opportunity to repent instead of further alienating ourselves from Him, from ourselves, from each other, and from the world He made. Have a great week.